Model building, the easiest hobby in the world. Just snap your fingers, and boom, you have a perfectly completed kit. No, that's not right. When you open the box, especially for kits made in the last few years, you're going to get sprues and sprues of highly detailed parts. Like tracks, you might even get a figure. And if you're really lucky, you'll get some photo etch parts. And, of course, you're going to get some decals. You'll come with some instructions, some tips, and then it'll show you some recommended tools. And that's great, but here are the tools I recommend. A knife, some glue, sanding sticks, something to cut on, some sprue cutters, a pencil, tweezers, some TAMIYA putty, a pin vise, more tweezers, scraper, super glue, and a razor saw. And just like that, voila. No. In reality, you have to cut everything from the sprue and then carefully, with a sharp hobby blade, take off that nub and sand it down so it's flush. And you have to do that for everything before you can finally glue those pieces together. But once all those pieces are cleaned up, it can really go pretty quickly. Does this make this look too easy? I don't know. Maybe. Some points of interest here. When you are putting some wheels together, they might have this little rubber bushing in them. And it's important not to glue the bushing. Sometimes they can spin, and that can make taking them on and off a little bit easier. And there can be keys in them so you get them rolling perfectly. For most parts in the kit, you're also going to have this seam. That's from the injection molding process, and you're going to need to scrape that away for the best detail. And it's as simple as just rubbing a sharp blade over it and taking all that away. So here's one of my first tips for building better models. And those road wheels are usually made of rubber on a lot of, especially World War II tanks. And you can show some damage in them by just chipping them away. And it just gives it that little extra something. You have to make sure you take care of these seam lines again here. And then covering them up with a little plastic cement there. Then it's as easy as putting the suspension on. And that can be glued in place. But the wheels we're going to dry fit for now. We don't want those attached to the model just yet. Whee! When it comes to the tracks, they need to be cleaned up just like every other piece. Once the seam lines are taken care of, I like to stick everything down to a piece of painter's tape. This way I can stick them together before I glue them. And again, you want a cement that is going to be flexible before it cures completely. So I've always used this cement here. And after a few minutes, I let it dry, and you can see it's still bendable. And you just bend that around the tracks. And once that's in place, that's when you leave it for an hour or two to make sure it's fully solid. Sometimes in kits, they can give you options. You have to pay attention to what model you're going to be building. This kit came with two options. This with the machine gun coming through the front hatch, and without. Of course, we're going to go with it. And an added extra detail, you can use a pin vise to fix up the barrel of that machine gun. That way it looks a lot more realistic. Same thing with these fenders. Kit fenders are usually really thick to scale. You can go with photo etched aftermarket pieces or make your own out of copper sheet, but for a beginner, the best thing to do, and it's really good practice, to start thinning down those fenders. You can see the one on the left compared to the one on the right. And then after that, gently, very carefully, you can use a candle to heat up the piece or your tweezers, and you can make little bends in them, because on historical photos, you'll never see a perfectly straight fender. And it's a matter of putting the turret together before we can move on to the next step. Once that's done, I mix TAMIYA putty and extra thin cement. I use an old one. If you don't have that, I save my old cement and I use it just for this process. Remove the cap, you don't need that, and use an old brush. Always good to save those. And just thin that out a lot. You have to make sure it's thin, or else you're going to cover up some of those details. You don't want to cover up all those rivets. So just keep thinning it down until it's nice consistency. And this is just going to give a really nice texture to those panels. And you do the whole thing. And this is why we've diverted from the directions a little bit. I chose to leave the fenders off until I finish this step so I wouldn't get any of this mixture on the fenders, which don't have that texture. And then we put them on now, along with all the other thinner metal parts that don't come from the casting process that leaves texture on a lot of tank armor. I like to put most of the details on my models before I paint them. Some people choose to leave tools and stowage off. I like to leave it on, and we'll see that in the painting video why. But this, the exhaust I did want to take off, so I modified this so I could put the shield on there and take this on and off. So that's going to be painted completely different with rust. And then we're moving on to the main gun assembly. Pretty straightforward. Most kits, the main gun can be moved. So when you're displaying it, you can choose your pose after the fact. You don't have to do it right now. So if you just follow the basic steps there, you'll be able to have a workable gun barrel. And we can't forget that photo etched. Comes in the kit. You got to put that on with a super glue. You can't use plastic cement for this because it will not melt the metal. So a little CA glue, just using some black Starbond. And I gave some texture to the exhaust as well. And then it's just a matter of putting everything together. And there you have it. That is a perfectly out-of-the-box but upgraded build. And you can just see there's so many more little extra details that you can do if this is your first model or second model. You know, if you want to up your building game just a little bit, you can use these tips. And I think you'll really like the results. Thanks so much for watching. If you haven't liked and subscribed, please do. And look forward to seeing you in the next video.